Prologue. The storm gathers. The wind howled across the Mongolian steppes in the winter of 1177, carrying with it more than just the bitter cold that could freeze a man's breath in his lungs. It carried destiny. Somewhere in that vast emptiness, a 15-year-old boy crouched in the shadows of Mount Burkan Khaldun, his threadbare dell offering little protection against the murderous chill. His name was Temujin, and he was being hunted. The Taychiud clan wanted him dead. They had already murdered his father with poisoned mare's milk, abandoned his family to starvation, and now pursued him like wolves after a wounded deer. But Temujin was no ordinary prey. In time, this desperate teenager would become Genghis Khan, the man who would build the largest contiguous land empire in human history. For now, though, he was simply trying to survive another night. The boy's world was one of stunning brutality and breathtaking beauty. The steppes stretched endlessly in every direction, a sea of grass that changed colors with the seasons, emerald in spring, golden in summer, blood red in autumn, and bone white in winter. This was the canvas upon which he would paint his empire, though he did not yet know it. The landscape itself was his first and greatest teacher, instructing him in the arts of survival, patience, and the delicate balance between mercy and ruthlessness. 13th century Mongolia was a fractured realm, split into countless tribes and clans that spent as much time fighting each other as they did the elements. It was a world where alliances were as shifting as the sand dunes of the Gobi, where today's blood brother could become tomorrow's mortal enemy. Power was measured in horses, sheep, and the number of warriors who would follow a leader into battle. The social structure was as rigid as the frozen ground in winter, with nobles or noyans commanding absolute loyalty from their subordinates. But something was stirring in the heart of Asia. The old ways were about to be swept aside by a force as inexorable as the spring floods that transformed the grasslands. The boy hiding in the mountain's shadow would grow into a man who would shatter this ancient system, replacing it with something entirely new. A meritocracy where a shepherd could become a general, where loyalty would be valued above noble birth, and where the only limits to advancement would be talent and devotion to the Khan. This is not merely the story of a conqueror, though conquest would certainly follow. It is the tale of a visionary who saw beyond the tribal boundaries that had defined his people for generations. It is the story of a leader who could be brutally cruel yet surprisingly merciful, who could destroy entire cities yet foster a renaissance of art, culture, and trade that would transform the medieval world. The teenager huddled against the mountain that night had lost everything: his father, his clan, his security, and very nearly his life. Yet in this moment of absolute desperation, something crystallized within him. The skills he was learning now, how to survive, how to read men's hearts, how to inspire loyalty, and how to lead, would serve as the foundation for an empire that would stretch from the Pacific Ocean to the Carpathian Mountains. As the wind continued its mournful song across the steppes, Temujin pulled his collar tighter against the cold. He had already learned the first and most crucial lesson of leadership: survive. Everything else would follow. The storm that would sweep across Asia was gathering strength, though none could yet see it. In time, it would reshape the world. The boy waited for dawn, knowing that if he could just endure this night, he would endure anything. He was right. This was merely the first test in a life that would become legend. The wind that had tried to freeze him would one day carry his name across continents, and the mountain that sheltered him would become sacred to his people for 1,000 years. The story of Genghis Khan begins here, in the darkness and the cold, with a boy who refused to die. Chapter 1. Blood of Wolves. The birth of a world-shaking force rarely announces itself with trumpets. In the spring of 1162, on the windswept banks of the Onan River, a baby boy was born, clutching a blood clot in his right hand, an omen, the shamans would later say, of his destiny to rule. His father, Yasuge, named him Temujin after a Tatar chieftain he had recently captured. It was a warrior's name for a warrior's son, though none could have predicted just how far that warrior would reach. Yasuge was a minor chief of the Borjigin clan, claiming descent from the noble blue-gray wolf of Mongol legend. But noble blood meant little in the harsh reality of the steppes, where power flowed as quickly as horses' blood into the grasslands. The Borjigin controlled perhaps 40,000 families, a modest force in the fractious world of 12th century Mongolia. They were surrounded by enemies, the Tatars to the east, the Merkits to the north, the Naimans to the west, and a dozen other tribes, all fighting for survival in a land where winter temperatures could plunge to 40 degrees below zero. Young Temujin learned early that survival required more than strength. It demanded cunning, patience, and the ability to read both friend and foe. At the age of 9, his father took him on the journey that would shape his future, the search for a bride. It was here that Yasuge made both a brilliant move and a fatal mistake. At the camp of the Ongirat clan, they found Berta, a girl 1 year older than Temujin. The alliance would be valuable, but the journey exposed Yasuge to his ancient enemies, the Tatars. On his return journey, Yasuge accepted an invitation to dine with a group of Tatars. It was a fatal courtesy. They recognized him as the man who had killed many of their kinsmen, and they seized their chance for revenge. The poison they slipped into his food did not kill him immediately. He managed to ride for 3 days, reaching his own lands before collapsing. As he lay dying, he dispatched his friend Monglik to bring Temujin home from the Ongirats. What followed was the first crucible that would forge the future Khan. Holen, Temujin's mother, was left with 7 children, including those from Yasuge's second wife, and a clan that wanted nothing to do with them. The tribal elders, the same men who had pledged loyalty to Yasuge over blood-spattered cups of fermented mare's milk, abandoned them before his body was cold. "The deep water has dried up," they said. "The strong stone has crumbled." They drove off the family's horses and left Holen and her children to starve. Lesser souls would have perished. Instead, Holen became both mother and warrior, teaching her children to survive on roots, berries, and whatever small game they could catch. Young Temujin learned to make fishhooks from needles, to hunt marmots with crude arrows, and to steal horses from those who had betrayed them. These years of desperate poverty would later inform his most revolutionary policies, his infamous meritocracy that promoted based on loyalty and ability rather than birth. But survival came at a terrible price. The competition for food within the family grew fierce, and one day Temujin and his full brother Kasar caught their half-brother Bektar stealing fish they had caught. What followed was the first recorded killing by the future Great Khan. Together with Kasar, Temujin murdered Bektar, an act that would haunt him even as it demonstrated the ruthless pragmatism that would later help him build an empire. By the age of 12, Temujin had already lived several lifetimes of hardship. He had seen betrayal, committed fratricide, and learned to survive in conditions that would have killed most grown men. But his greatest test was yet to come. The Merkits, an enemy tribe that had once been humiliated by his father, had not forgotten their grudge. They waited until Temujin had claimed his bride Berta, waited until he had begun to build a small following of his own, and then they struck. The raid came at dawn. 800 Merkit warriors descended on Temujin's camp, seeking revenge for an offense that had occurred before he was born. His father had stolen his mother Holen from a Merkit man, and now they would repay that insult by taking Berta. Temujin, with barely a handful of followers, could only watch from the safety of Mount Burkan Khaldun as his wife was carried away. This humiliation would prove to be the turning point. To rescue Berta, Temujin would need allies, and to gain allies, he would need to become more than just another minor chief's son fighting for survival. He would need to become something the steppes had never seen before, a leader who could unite the warring tribes under a single banner. The boy who had once eaten rats to survive was about to begin his transformation into the man who would conquer half the known world. The blood of wolves ran in his veins, but it would be his human qualities, his ability to inspire loyalty, his talent for organization, and his genius for turning enemies into allies that would truly change history. Chapter 1. Blood of Wolves. Chapter 2. Forged in Fire. The rescue of Berta would prove to be more than just a husband's desperate gambit to recover his stolen wife. It was the catalyst that would transform a talented survivor into the architect of an empire. In the aftermath of the Merkit raid, Temujin made a decision that would alter the course of Asian history. He rode to the camp of Togrul Khan of the Kerait tribe, a man who had once sworn a friendship oath with his father, Yesuge. The meeting between the two men perfectly illustrated the chaos of steppe politics circa 1184. Togrul, leader of a powerful Christian tribe in a predominantly shamanistic world, received the young warrior who came bearing a humble gift, a sable coat that had been part of Temujin's wedding payment. The older Khan understood the unspoken message. Here was a young man who offered loyalty before requesting aid. It was exactly the kind of political instinct that would later help Temujin build his empire. "I will gather your scattered people," Togrul promised, "as one gathers the felt of a tent." The support of the Kerait leader brought Temujin something he had never possessed before: legitimate political power. But it was his next alliance that would truly begin to reshape the steppes. Enter Jamuka, the young leader of the Jadaran clan. Blood brother to Temujin through an ancient ceremony where they had exchanged arrows and sworn eternal loyalty, Jamuka commanded a significant following among the Mongol tribes. Together with Togrul's forces, they launched a devastating attack on the Merkits, rescuing Berta after 8 months of captivity. The campaign showcased Temujin's emerging military genius, a combination of lightning cavalry raids and psychological warfare that would become his trademark. But the steppes had never witnessed what came next. Rather than simply celebrating his victory, Temujin began systematically dismantling the traditional tribal structure that had governed Mongol society for centuries. It started with a radical proposition: any warrior, regardless of clan or birth, could rise to leadership in his army based solely on loyalty and ability. This meritocracy sent shockwaves through the rigid hierarchical system of steppe society. When Temujin elevated a former slave to the position of general, the tribal nobles were scandalized. When he promoted a shepherd's son to command thousands based on his tactical brilliance, the old guard nearly revolted. But the results spoke for themselves. His army, organized on a decimal system, units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000, began to operate with unprecedented efficiency. The blood brotherhood with Jamuka, however, was destined to shatter. Their fundamental difference emerged during a seemingly minor incident: the pace of a march. Jamuka, following tradition, allowed his warriors to set their own speed. Temujin, ever the innovator, insisted on strict military discipline. This philosophical split between the old ways and the new would eventually tear the steppes apart. Their final break came during a feast in 1186. Jamuka, speaking with the flowery metaphors beloved by Mongol nobles, declared, "Have we not agreed, sworn brother, that we would not be jealous of each other, even over a starving mouse? Yet now, for the sake of leading the people, we have become divided." The words masked a deadly serious power struggle. Within days, most of Temujin's followers deserted to Jamuka's camp. Lesser men would have been destroyed by such a betrayal. Temujin turned it into an opportunity. Those who remained loyal to him became his core leadership, the nucleus around which he would build his empire. He instituted another revolutionary policy: the protection of civilians during warfare. While other leaders allowed their warriors to loot and rape, Temujin's army maintained strict discipline. The result: ordinary people began deliberately seeking his protection. His innovations extended beyond the military sphere. He created the Jarej-carved tablets that served as diplomatic passports and established the Yam system of relay stations that would eventually span his empire. He instituted a code of laws, the Yasa, that applied equally to commoners and nobles. Most radically, he offered defeated enemies a choice: join him and enjoy equal rights under his leadership, or die. The struggle between Temujin and Jamukha would last nearly 2 decades, a contest between two brilliant commanders that would ultimately determine the fate of the steppes. Their battles became legendary at Dalan Balshut, where Jamukha boiled enemy commanders alive in cauldrons, at Khoitan, where Temujin's superior discipline proved decisive, and finally at the Khalkhin Gol, where Jamukha's last allies abandoned him. When Jamukha was finally brought before him in chains, Temujin offered to renew their brotherhood. It was a genuine gesture, perhaps the last moment of pure sentiment we see from the future, Genghis Khan. But Jamukha, understanding his blood brother better than anyone, replied with words that would be recorded in the secret history of the Mongols. In the sky, there is room for only one sun, and on the earth, room for only one Mongol lord. Jamukha requested a noble death execution without bloodshed, and Temujin granted it, having him bent backward until his spine broke. With Jamukha's death, the last obstacle to Mongol unification was removed. In 1206, at a great Kurultai assembly near the sources of the Onon River, Temujin was proclaimed Genghis Khan, universal ruler of all the peoples of the felt-walled tents. The fires that had forged him were finally cooling, but the greatest conflagration was yet to come. The man who emerged from these decades of struggle was no longer simply a tribal leader or even a great general. He had become something unprecedented, a visionary who could see beyond the endless cycles of raid and counter-raid that had defined steppe life for millennia. The world beyond Mongolia's borders was about to discover just how far that vision would reach. Chapter 3: The Art of Conquest. In the spring of 1206, as the great Kurultai dispersed and the newly proclaimed Genghis Khan surveyed his unified empire, he faced a challenge that had defeated every previous steppe leader: how to transform a confederation of tribal warriors into a professional army capable of conquering civilizations. The solution he devised would revolutionize warfare and create the most sophisticated military machine of the medieval world. The transformation began with a simple yet revolutionary act: the complete dismantling of tribal military units. Warriors who had fought together since childhood were deliberately separated and reorganized into Genghis's decimal system. A soldier's primary loyalty would no longer be to his clan chief, but to his commanding officer and ultimately to the Khan himself. The resistance was immediate and fierce. As one noble protested, "Our ancestors did not do this," Genghis's response was characteristically blunt: "Your ancestors were fools." His new army structure was a masterpiece of organizational efficiency. The basic unit was the Arban, 10 men, followed by the Jagan, 100, Mingan, 1,000, and Tumen, 10,000. But these weren't merely administrative divisions. They were living, breathing organisms designed for both combat and social cohesion. Each Arban was expected to function as a family, with members sharing everything from meals to war spoils. If one member fled in battle, the entire unit was executed. If one achieved something extraordinary, all shared in the glory. The results were spectacular. Take the case of Jelmi, a common soldier who had once offered the young Temujin a drink of horseblood when he was near starvation. Under the old system, Jelm would have remained a minor warrior in his tribal unit. Under Genghis's meritocracy, he rose to command a Tumen, leading 10,000 men with such efficiency that Chinese chroniclers would later write of him with a mixture of fear and admiration. But organization alone didn't explain the Mongol army's devastating effectiveness. Genghis instituted a training regimen that would have exhausted a professional athlete. The Nurj, or circular hunt, was more than just a way to obtain meat. It was a massive military exercise involving thousands of warriors who had to maintain precise formations while maneuvering over difficult terrain. These hunts could cover an area the size of modern Hungary, requiring the same level of coordination needed for large-scale battlefield maneuvers. The Khan's military innovations went far beyond mere training. He standardized equipment, ensuring every warrior carried a similar bow, arrows, sword, and tools. The famous Mongol composite bow, capable of penetrating armor at 200 yards, became a symbol of their military superiority. Each warrior maintained at least 3 horses, allowing them to cover vast distances at speeds that seemed supernatural to their enemies. In 1207, this newly forged weapon received its first test against the Xia kingdom. The campaign revealed another of Genghis's military innovations: psychological warfare elevated to an art form. Before each major battle, he sent merchants and spies into enemy territory, spreading tales of Mongol invincibility. When the actual attack came, he often had his troops tie branches to their horses' tails, creating massive dust clouds that made his army appear far larger than it was. The siege of their capital, Zhongxing, demonstrated yet another revolution in warfare. Steppe nomads had traditionally been helpless against fortified cities, but Genghis turned this weakness into strength. He recruited Chinese and Persian engineers into his army, learning and then improving upon their siege techniques. When conventional methods failed, he diverted an entire river to flood Zhongxing's defensive positions. The message was clear: no fortress was impregnable to the Great Khan. But perhaps his most brilliant innovation was the creation of the Yam system, a military communication network that spanned his growing empire. Relay stations were established every 25 miles, allowing messages to travel up to 250 miles per day. This system enabled Genghis to coordinate military operations across vast distances with unprecedented precision. During the later campaign against the Jin dynasty, he could receive intelligence from the front lines and send new orders back within days, while his enemies took weeks to communicate with their own forces. The results of these innovations became apparent in the statistics that would terrify settled civilizations. A Mongol Tumen could cover 100 miles in a day, fight a major battle, and be ready to march again the next morning. They could shoot arrows with accuracy while riding at full gallop, a skill that required years of training but made them virtually invincible on the open field. Their tactics were so sophisticated that military academies still study them today. Consider the Battle of the Khalkha River in 1223. The Mongol general Subutai, a former blacksmith's son who rose purely on merit, faced a combined Russian Kipchak army that outnumbered his forces 3-1. Using the famous feigned retreat tactic that Genghis had perfected, Subutai drew the enemy into a 9-day pursuit, breaking their formation and exhausting their horses. When he finally turned to fight, the battle was over in a matter of hours. The Russian princes were captured and suffocated under wooden planks, while the Mongol generals dined above them, a calculated act of psychological warfare that would resonate through European chronicles for centuries. By 1215, when Genghis Khan's army approached the Jin capital of Zhongdu, modern-day Beijing, they were no longer just a superior military force. They were an unstoppable natural phenomenon. The Jin emperor, commanding what had been the most powerful army in East Asia, fled south rather than face them in battle. His generals, trained in centuries of Chinese military tradition, found themselves outmaneuvered by nomads who had turned warfare into a science. The art of conquest, as perfected by Genghis Khan, was not merely about winning battles. It was about transforming the very nature of warfare. He had created an army that could adapt to any terrain, overcome any fortification, and defeat any enemy. More importantly, he had built an institution that would outlive him, carrying his descendants to the shores of the Pacific and the gates of Vienna. As the Khan surveyed the burning ruins of Zhongdu, he might have reflected on how far he had come from the days when his entire army could fit around a single campfire. But this was just the beginning. His gaze was already turning west, toward the wealthy kingdoms of Central Asia. The greatest conquests of the Mongol Empire were yet to come. Chapter 4: Thunder in the East. The fall of Zhongdu in 1215 marked more than just another conquest. It represented the moment when Genghis Khan's Mongols faced their greatest challenge yet: how to rule what they had won. The nomads who had lived in, felt tense, now found themselves masters of cities with millions of inhabitants, inheritors of a sophisticated bureaucratic system they barely understood, and custodians of cultural treasures they had initially seen only as plunder. The Jin dynasty's territory had included northern China, an area that had been the epicenter of civilization for millennia. Its cities contained technological and cultural wonders that must have seemed like sorcery to the Mongols. Printed books, paper money, mechanical clocks, and administrative systems capable of governing tens of millions of people. A lesser conqueror would have simply looted these treasures and retreated to the steppes. Genghis Khan saw an opportunity to transform his empire. Consider the case of Yelu Chukai, a captured Jin official who would become one of the Khan's most valuable advisors. When first brought before Genghis, Yelu had expected execution. Instead, he found himself engaged in a fascinating conversation with the world's most powerful man about governance. The empire may have been conquered on horseback, Yelu famously told the Khan, but it cannot be ruled from horseback. Genghis's response was characteristic. Then teach us how to rule. The learning curve was steep and often bloody. The Mongols' initial attempts at city management were disasters. In Zhongdu, they had simply executed the entire administrative class, leading to the collapse of basic services. But Genghis Khan's genius lay in his ability to learn from mistakes. He began actively recruiting talented administrators from conquered populations, offering them positions of real authority within his growing empire. The siege of Kaifeng in 1232 illustrated how far the Mongols had come in their mastery of settled warfare. Unlike earlier sieges that relied primarily on brute force, this campaign showcased a sophisticated integration of technology and tactics. The Mongols deployed gunpowder weapons, including early forms of bombs and rockets, which they had learned to manufacture from captured Chinese engineers. They used Muslim experts to build counterweight trebuchets capable of hurling 100-pound stones over city walls. When these failed to break the city's defenses, they employed psychological warfare, sending captured citizens back into the city with one eye gouged out, a calculated act of terror that highlighted the strange mixture of sophistication and brutality that characterized Mongol warfare. But the most remarkable transformation was happening behind the front lines. Genghis established a new capital at Karakorum, which would become one of the world's most cosmopolitan cities. Here, one could find Buddhist temples next to Muslim mosques and Christian churches, while Chinese administrators worked alongside Persian astronomers and European craftsmen. The Khan instituted a system of religious tolerance that was centuries ahead of its time, declaring that all religions are like the fingers of one hand. The conquest of the Xixia and Jin territories also forced the Mongols to develop sophisticated economic policies. They needed to maintain the agricultural and commercial systems that made these regions wealthy while preserving their own military effectiveness. The solution was elegant. The Mongols created a professional class of administrators drawn from conquered peoples while maintaining their own warrior elite as a separate caste. This allowed them to benefit from settled civilization without becoming softened by it. Technology transfer became a hallmark of Mongol rule. When they captured Chinese siege engineers, they immediately sent them west to help with campaigns in Central Asia. When they found Persian astronomers, they sent them east to establish observatories in China. This cross-pollination of ideas and techniques would have profound effects on world history. The spread of gunpowder weapons, paper manufacturing, and printing technology can all be traced to Mongol conquests. The development of the yam system reached new levels of sophistication during this period. What had begun as a military communication network evolved into a trade and diplomatic infrastructure that would eventually span Asia. Merchants could travel safely from Korea to Persia, carrying goods and ideas along with them. The Mongols established standardized weights and measures, regulated currency exchange, and provided armed escorts for caravans. Marco Polo would later travel this network, marveling at its efficiency. Perhaps most surprisingly, the Mongols became patrons of culture and learning. Genghis Khan, who could neither read nor write, ordered the creation of a new script for the Mongol language and commanded that all his children be educated. He established schools throughout his domains and encouraged the translation of important works between languages. The Great Library at Karakoram would eventually contain books in dozens of languages, from Chinese philosophical texts to Persian poetry. The Khan's personal evolution mirrored that of his empire. The man who had once responded to resistance by ordering entire cities razed now carefully studied captured documents about governance and taxation. He began to understand that sustainable empire required more than just military might. It needed commerce, administration, and the consent, however reluctant, of the governed. Yet even as the Mongols absorbed the sophistication of settled civilizations, they maintained the military prowess that had won them their empire. Their armies became even more lethal as they incorporated new technologies and tactics. The campaign against the Southern Song dynasty demonstrated this evolution. Mongol forces now included naval units, siege specialists, and gunpowder weapons, while still maintaining the cavalry skills that had made them invincible on the steppes. By 1227, when Genghis Khan died during the campaign against the Shishia, his empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea. More importantly, it had evolved from a simple conquest state into a sophisticated imperial system that would survive and expand under his successors. The thunder that had begun in the east would continue to roll across Asia and into Europe, carried forward by the institutions and systems he had created. Chapter 5: West of the Sun. In 1219, a caravan arrived at Genghis Khan's camp, bearing news that would change the course of history. The Shah of Khwarezm had executed Mongol ambassadors and merchants, violating the most sacred principle of Mongol diplomacy. The Khan's response was characteristically direct. God is one, and I am his agent on earth. As there is only one God in heaven, there can be only one ruler on earth. With these words, he launched the largest cavalry operation in military history. The numbers alone were staggering. 200,000 Mongol warriors would traverse more than 2,000 miles of hostile territory. Their campaign would destroy the most powerful Islamic empire of its day and forever change the face of Central Asia. But numbers tell only part of the story. What unfolded was not merely a military campaign, but a clash of civilizations that would reshape the medieval world. The Khwarezmian Empire stretched from modern-day Iran to Kazakhstan, boasting some of the world's most magnificent cities. Its ruler, Shah Muhammad II, commanded an army 4 times the size of the Mongol force. He had every reason to feel confident. After all, what did these nomads know about taking fortified cities or managing complex siege operations? The Shah was about to learn the cost of underestimating Genghis Khan. The Khan's first move demonstrated his mastery of psychological warfare. He sent a message to the Shah's mother. "If you surrender now, perhaps I will leave you a small garden to sit in." The implied threat was clear. Everything else would be destroyed. When she showed the message to her son, he laughed it off. Neither of them understood that they were dealing with a military genius who had turned warfare into an exact science. The campaign began with a masterpiece of deception. Instead of following the expected route through the Sur Darya Valley, Genghis led his main army through the Kizilkum Desert, a feat considered impossible at the time. While the Shah positioned his forces to defend the obvious approaches, Mongol armies seemed to materialize from nowhere, striking simultaneously at multiple targets. The coordination was unprecedented. Using their YAM system, Mongol generals hundreds of miles apart could synchronize their attacks with remarkable precision. Consider the siege of Bukhara, one of the greatest cities of the Islamic world. The Mongols arrived with a multicultural army that included Chinese siege engineers, Persian sappers, and Turkish auxiliaries. When the city's leaders emerged to negotiate, they found Genghis Khan himself sitting on horseback before the main gate. In a moment of theater that would be recorded by Persian historians, he rode into the city's great mosque, declared himself the punishment of God, and had his horses fed with the library's precious manuscripts. Yet even as his warriors looted the city, his administrators were carefully cataloging its artisans and scholars for deployment elsewhere in the empire. But it was at Samarkand that the full sophistication of Mongol warfare was displayed. The city was defended by 110,000 men and massive walls that had never been breached. The Mongols arrived with barely 50,000 warriors. They began by using captured prisoners as human shields to fill the moat with earth and debris. When the defenders saw their own people being slaughtered, many surrendered. Those who continued to resist faced a new weapon: gunpowder bombs hurled by Chinese catapults. Within days, this jewel of Central Asia fell. The Shah fled west, pursued by a special task force under Generals Jebe and Subutai. What followed was one of history's most remarkable pursuit operations. The two generals, commanding only 20,000 men, chased the Shah across his entire empire, covering 5,500 miles in 2 years. They operated deep in enemy territory, living off the land, gathering intelligence, and maintaining communication with the main army through the Yam network. When they finally cornered the Shah on a small island in the Caspian Sea, he died, not by Mongol arrows, but from sheer exhaustion. In the aftermath of conquest came one of history's great ironies. The nomads who had destroyed the Islamic Empire became its greatest promoters. Genghis Khan's grandson Hulegu would later establish the Ilkhanate in Persia, becoming a patron of Islamic art and science. The Mongols built new cities, repaired irrigation systems, and protected trade routes. The Silk Road, under Mongol protection, entered its golden age. The campaign also marked a crucial evolution in Mongol statecraft. They began incorporating Islamic administrative practices into their empire, adopted Persian as their diplomatic language, and recruited Muslim scholars and scientists into their service. The descendants of nomads who had once disdained city life became sophisticated urban rulers. Yet this sophistication never came at the expense of military effectiveness. When the Mongols encountered the assassin sect of Alamut, whose mountain fortresses had defied previous empires, they simply used Chinese siege engineers to level the mountains themselves. When faced with the problem of crossing the Hindu Kush Mountains, they developed new types of horseshoes and high-altitude warfare techniques that would not be equaled until modern times. The westward expansion also brought the Mongols into contact with Europe. In 1223, Jebe and Subutai's reconnaissance force destroyed a combined Russian Kipchak army at the Kalka River. This reconnaissance in force would later be followed by a full-scale invasion under Genghis's grandson Batu, creating the Golden Horde that would dominate Russia for centuries. By the time the campaign ended, the Mongol Empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea. More significantly, it had evolved into something unprecedented, a truly international system of governance that combined nomadic military prowess with sophisticated administrative practices drawn from China, Persia, and the Islamic world. The destruction was immense. Some estimates suggest that the population of Greater Iran did not recover its pre-Mongol levels until the 20th century. Yet from this devastation emerged a new world order, a Pax Mongolica that would facilitate unprecedented levels of trade, cultural exchange, and technological transfer across Eurasia. Chapter 6. The Khan's Shadow. By 1225, Genghis Khan faced a challenge greater than any military campaign, ensuring his empire would survive him. The man who had conquered half the known world now turned his attention to an even more complex task, transforming a personality-driven conquest state into an enduring dynasty. The decisions he made in these final years would echo through centuries, creating administrative systems that would influence empires from China to Persia. The Khan's first task was succession planning, and here he broke decisively with tradition. Mongol custom dictated that the youngest son should inherit the homeland, while older sons received distant territories. Instead, Genghis implemented a complex system of overlapping authority that would both ensure stability and plant the seeds of future civil wars. Each son received an army and territory, but ultimate authority would pass to his third son, Ogadai, whom he judged the most capable of maintaining unity. "I have constructed an empire on horseback," he reportedly told his sons, "but you cannot rule it on horseback." These words marked the beginning of one of history's most remarkable transformations. The man who had once ordered the execution of entire cities now worked meticulously to create administrative systems that would outlast him. Consider the case of Mahmud Yalavash, a merchant from Khwarazm who caught the Khan's attention with his understanding of urban administration. Rather than simply using him as an advisor, Genghis placed him in charge of all civilian affairs in Central Asia and northern China. This appointment exemplified the Khan's late-life philosophy. Military conquest required Mongol warriors, but effective governance required experienced administrators from settled civilizations. The creation of the Yasa Code during this period revealed both the sophistication and limitations of Mongol governance. This legal system combined traditional steppe customs with innovations drawn from conquered civilizations. It regulated everything from military discipline to commercial contracts, establishing standardized weights and measures across the empire. Yet characteristically, Genghis insisted that it be kept secret from conquered peoples. Administration might be delegated, but true power would remain Mongol. Family politics during these years proved as complex as imperial administration. The Khan's four principal sons, Jochi, Chagatai, Ogadai, and Tolui, represented different visions for the empire's future. Yoshi, whose paternity was questioned due to his mother Berta's captivity among the Merkits, advocated for greater autonomy of regional kingdoms. Chagatai, the stern traditionalist, insisted on maintaining pure Mongol customs. Ogadai represented a middle path, while Tolui, the youngest, maintained the closest connection to the army. The Khan's solution was characteristically pragmatic. He divided the empire into 4 uluses, regions, each administered by a son, but maintained central authority through the Kurultai system, regular assemblies of Mongol princes, where major decisions would be made collectively. This system would eventually evolve into the 4 great Mongol Khanates: the Yuan dynasty in China, the Il Khanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Golden Horde in Russia. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this period was the Khan's creation of a sophisticated intelligence network. The YAM system, originally designed for military communication, evolved into something resembling a modern diplomatic corps. Mongol princes were required to maintain permanent representatives at each other's courts, ostensibly for coordination, but actually for surveillance. These representatives reported directly to the Great Khan, creating a web of information that helped maintain imperial unity. Religious policy during these years demonstrated both the Khan's pragmatism and his vision for a sustainable empire. While maintaining his personal shamanistic beliefs, he actively recruited Buddhist, Muslim, Christian, and Taoist advisors. His famous decree, "In the sky there is only one sun, and on earth there is only one Khan," was less about religious doctrine than administrative unity. By positioning himself above sectarian divisions, he created a framework for managing a multi-religious empire that was centuries ahead of its time. The Khan's attention to detail in these administrative matters was legendary. He personally approved the design of official seals, standardized writing systems, and diplomatic protocols. When informed that different regions use different calendars, he ordered the creation of a unified system for dating official documents. When told that merchants were struggling with multiple currencies, he established standardized exchange rates across the empire. Yet even as he built these sophisticated systems, Genghis never forgot the source of Mongol power. He required all princes of the blood to maintain their riding and archery skills, and regularly organized great hunts that doubled as military exercises. His famous dictum that "an arrow shot by a child is still an arrow" reflected his belief that maintaining military effectiveness was crucial to imperial survival. The Khan's final years were marked by an increasing focus on education and cultural transmission. He ordered the creation of the Uyghur script for writing Mongolian, commissioned histories of his conquests, and established schools for training future administrators. The man who had never learned to read ensured that his grandchildren would be literate in multiple languages. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, reportedly from injuries sustained in a fall from his horse, he left behind more than just conquered territories. He had created an administrative system that would allow his successors to rule the largest contiguous land empire in history. The shadow he cast would extend far beyond his own lifetime, influencing everything from Chinese bureaucracy to Russian state building. These systems would be tested almost immediately. The transition to Ogadai's rule would prove smoother than many expected, but the inherent tensions between centralized authority and regional autonomy would eventually lead to civil wars and the empire's division. Yet even in division, the administrative structures Genghis created would survive, some persisting into the modern era. Epilogue: the eternal blue sky. On a crisp morning in 2006, construction workers broke ground on a massive statue of Genghis Khan just outside Ulaanbaatar. The 131-foot stainless steel colossus depicts the great Khan astride his horse, gazing eastward toward his birthplace. Built with modern materials but drawing on ancient imagery, the statue perfectly embodies the paradox of Genghis Khan's modern legacy, a 13th century warrior king whose influence shapes the 21st century in unexpected ways. Visit Mongolia today and you'll find Genghis Khan everywhere, on vodka bottles and hotel logos, on the currency and in political speeches. The capital's airport bears his name, and his face adorns everything from playing cards to luxury watches. This is more than mere commercialization. It represents a profound reconnection with national identity after centuries of Chinese and Soviet domination. When Mongolia embraced democracy in 1990, the first act of the new government was to replace Marx's portrait in Sukbatar Square with an image of the Great Khan. But Genghis Khan's modern influence extends far beyond Mongolia's borders. In 2003, a groundbreaking genetic study revealed that approximately 16 million men, roughly 1 in every 200 males on Earth, carry a Y chromosome sequence originating from Mongolia during the time of Genghis Khan. This Khan signature appears in populations from Pacific Russia to Afghanistan, creating what might be called a genetic echo of the Mongol Empire. The Great Khan, it seems, conquered not just territories, but gene pools. The academic world has undergone its own Mongol revolution, where 19th century historians saw only a barbaric destroyer. Modern scholars find a sophisticated innovator whose administrative and military systems helped create the modern world. Military academies study his campaigns. Business schools analyze his organizational techniques. Political scientists examine his methods of statecraft. Consider how many modern innovations have roots in Mongol practices. The paper currency you carry. The Mongols pioneered its widespread use. The passport in your pocket. A descendant of the Mongol paisa system. The diplomatic immunity that protects ambassadors. A principle Genghis Khan helped establish. Even the concept of international postal services traces back to the Mongol yam system. In Beijing's Forbidden City, tourists photograph imperial buildings whose administrative functions were first established under Mongol rule. In Iran, scholars study Ilkhanate documents that helped shape Persian bureaucracy. In Russia, the centralized state apparatus evolved directly from Mongol administrative practices. These are not mere historical curiosities, they are living legacies that continue to influence how nations function. Technology transfer, that crucial driver of modern globalization, finds a predecessor in Mongol practices. Just as Genghis Khan moved Persian astronomers to China and Chinese siege engineers to Persia, today's global companies move expertise across borders. His empire's standardized weights and measures, protected trade routes, and diplomatic passport system prefigured many aspects of modern international commerce. Modern Mongolia itself presents a fascinating case study in the Great Khan's enduring relevance. The country's transition from Soviet-style communism to free market democracy has been accompanied by intense debate about Genghis Khan's legacy. Which aspects of his rule should modern Mongolia emulate? His meritocracy, his religious tolerance, his ability to adapt foreign innovations while maintaining cultural identity. These are not academic questions, but practical concerns for a nation finding its place in the modern world. Yet this modern embrace of Genghis Khan also highlights how historical figures evolve in society's memory. The brutal conqueror becomes the nation builder. The destroyer of cities becomes the founder of international law. The illiterate warrior becomes the patron of cultural exchange. Each age finds in him what it needs, reinterpreting his legacy through the lens of contemporary concerns. Perhaps that's why Genghis Khan remains relevant. His story speaks to enduring questions about leadership, innovation, and cultural interaction. How do you unite diverse peoples under a common purpose? How do you maintain cultural identity while adopting foreign innovations? How do you create administrative systems that transcend cultural boundaries? These were his challenges, and they remain ours. In 2012, a remarkable document emerged from a private collection, a land grant signed by Genghis Khan himself, one of only 2 known documents bearing his personal seal. The paper, ink, and seal have been authenticated, allowing us to touch, however briefly, the physical reality behind the legend. Yet even this tangible artifact raises questions. The document, written in Chinese bureaucratic style, shows how the illiterate steppe warrior had already begun adapting sophisticated administrative practices. It reminds us that the real Genghis Khan was neither the bloodthirsty barbarian of medieval chronicles nor the romanticized hero of modern Mongolia, but something far more interesting. A man who changed the world by learning to bridge cultures. Under the eternal blue sky of Mongolia, the Steel Horseman continues his eastward gaze. Tour guides tell visitors that if you touch the statue's boot, some of the great Khan's wisdom and power will flow into you. It's a tourist tale, of course, but it contains a deeper truth. Genghis Khan's real legacy isn't in his genes, or his conquests, or even his innovations. It's in showing how one person's vision can reshape the world, how diversity can become strength, and how the most profound changes can come from the most unexpected places. The wind still blows across the steppes, as it did 8 centuries ago when a desperate teenager hid from his enemies on Mount Burkhan Khaldun. That boy could not have imagined that his descendants would build a statue larger than the mountain that sheltered him. But then, who could have imagined that a homeless child from a defeated clan would create systems and innovations that would help shape the modern world? Perhaps that's the final lesson of Genghis Khan's legacy. In a world grappling with globalization, cultural conflict, and technological change, his story reminds us that the future is never certain, that profound change can come from anywhere, and that the most lasting conquests are not of territories, but of ideas. Under the eternal blue sky, the wind continues to blow, carrying with it echoes of hoofbeats from 8 centuries ago and whispers of changes yet to